It was 0400 hours on August the 15th. I had reported from my scheduled watch on the signal bridge of the USS Dayton. The watch that we relieved briefed us. We were and made the necessary notations in the ship's log. We were cruising at 10 knots and were 110 nautical miles southeast of Tokyo on a heading of 270 degrees. We are observing radio silence, merry black light with our communications media. The aircraft carriers were preparing for flight operation. The target of the air attack today would be Tokyo. I glanced out over the ocean. I could see the ships of the Task Group 38.3 silhouetted on the morning dawn. It was a relatively warm night. There was a light breeze and a slight rolling sea. A beautiful day was dawning.
Welcome to Around Leisure World. This is Joe Osuna. Today we're talking to veterans of World War II. So we have a young man here next to me by the name of Joe HEALY, who is going to tell us a little bit about himself first, and then we'll get into your experiences with World War II. So let's start with the young Joe HEALY. Where are you from, and tell us about your high school.
Well, I was born in Colwell, New Jersey, grew up in Verona, New Jersey. I went to Verona High School, graduated from Verona High School, and as you can put together, in my senior year, your focus was pretty much on what service would I join. In those days, if I had gone all the way to my 18th birthday in August of that year, I would have been drafted, which probably meant I would automatically go into the Army. I wasn't favorably disposed to go into the Army and decided that I wanted to be in the Navy. I went down and talked to a naval recruiter. He told me if I could get my parents' permission, I could be enlisted and sworn into the Navy when I was 17, with the proviso that I would not leave the country and see action until after my 18th birthday. So my parents begrudgingly signed that authorization, and I joined the Navy, and immediately upon graduation I went to Sampson Naval Training Station in upstate New York, graduated boot camp, went from there up to Newport, Rhode Island, attended communications school in Newport, was put into ship's company, which was designated the USS Dayton. We were going to be the original crew of the Dayton, and went to Philadelphia by the end of that year, 1944, and went on our shakedown cruise to the Caribbean, returned to Philadelphia from shakedown, had some repairs done to the ship, then proceeded to the Panama Canal, through the Panama Canal directly to Hawaii.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there at Hawaii. So we're in Hawaii. Let's go back to your high school experience, and then we'll continue on with what happens after Hawaii. Okay. In high school, what kind of activities were you involved in?
Well, three basic activities. One, in the fall, I was playing soccer. Then in the spring, I was on the track team. I was a miler. And in addition to that, during that time, there was extreme shortage of truck drivers, and they were paying good money to people who could drive a truck. I had an opportunity to learn how to drive a truck, and got an afternoon job after school. And within 3 months, I was driving an 8,000-gallon tanker truck delivering fuel oil.
So we have a 17-year-old kid running around the city driving 18, well, how many?
8,000 gallons.
8,000 gallons of fuel.
Yes.
Okay. Well, they wouldn't let you do that under today's rules, I imagine.
I would think not. But that was wartime.
That was wartime, and that was a
And
necessity.
people needed fuel to keep their homes heated, and they had to have trucks to deliver that fuel.
So if they wanted fuel, they let a 17-year-old young man deliver that fuel. Okay.
Well, I was a responsible young man.
That's right, and you still are, aren't you? Okay. Okay, so the trip through the Panama Canal. I imagine the Panama Canal was in that era about the same as it is now in the structure and the way it operated, or do you recall anything about the crossing through the canal?
Oh yeah. I wouldn't say that it hasn't changed, because I would imagine it has changed. But we went into Cristobal, which is the port on the east side, and waited our turn to go through the canal. I thought one of the most interesting sights that I've seen going through the canal is that an attack transport went through the canal just before we did. Mm-hmm. And an attack transport has all of these LCVPs, the landing craft for personnel and vehicles, on the side of them. Mm-hmm. Well, they wouldn't fit through the canal. So all of these LCVPs were all put in to the water, and the mothership went into the lock, and then it was like all these little ducks lined up alongside of it. It was a cute little thing to see. Oh. And then the ship would move to the next lock, and all these little LCVPs would come up alongside of her, and that's the way they went through the canal. And kind of an interesting story. Okay. We went through the canal. Was an interesting thing to do. Okay. But nothing exciting about it. You know?
Now the ship you were on that's going through the canal is that the light cruiser, or?
That is a light cruiser. We were Cleveland class.
Okay, tell us about a Cleveland class. What's a Cleveland class light cruiser? I know what a destroyer is. I know what a heavy cruiser is, but I'm not sure what a Cleveland class is.
Well, the Cleveland class, by this time in the war, the Navy was taking heavy losses due to kamikazes, attacks on carriers. And the cruisers and destroyers that were there did not provide adequate anti-aircraft protection for the carriers. So the Navy decided to take and develop a Cleveland-class cruiser, which, for all practical purposes, was an anti-aircraft platform. That was our total mission in life, was to protect the carriers from kamikaze airplanes. And I don't know, I would guess, just being with them in the Pacific, by the time I got out there, I would say 12 to 15 Cleveland-class cruisers were operating with the Navy out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have you going through the Panama Canal and then heading toward Hawaii.
Yes.
So let's continue the story.
We stopped in Hawaii, nothing uneventful or eventful there, did some provisioning, picked up an interesting thing at that time, a top secret they call black light. And this allowed us to conduct light signals at night.
With a black light?
With a black light.
Now, how would a black light work in the black of night?
You took this attachment and put it on the front of your normal 12-inch light, and you put special goggles on, and we could actually turn the light on the ship and light up the Marines in the 20 millimeter mounts that were below us. In the middle of the night, we could light them up. But yet, if you took the goggles off and looked down at those Marines, it would be totally dark.
Oh, okay.
But we could sit there and send light. And the code name, if we were going to send light, would be over the radio, "This is Blackjack. We have Mary." And Mary was the code name, is we will be transmitting by a black light. And that was a whole new experience for us.
You mentioned lights. Okay, so you were in communications,
Yes.
and you're talking about lights. How do you communicate with lights?
Morse code. A
Okay.
long hold a light on is a dash, and a quick light is a dot. So you're following the Morse code, sending C, da, 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 da.
And what's a did da da da?
Did,
Remember?
da, da, da is a B.
Oh, very good. Okay. So you had to learn your Morse code.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
About how fast did you have to read Morse code or send Morse code? Remember what the minimum was to be a communications guy?
Oh, I would say around 15, 20 words a minute.
Okay. Okay. Now, you mentioned 12-inch light.
Yes.
Were there any other size lights?
Yes, depending on the distance and what we tried to do, we try to go farther out. I would say effectively the 12-inch light was good maybe up to 8, 10 miles. We could then send out to the horizon or just beyond the horizon with a 24-inch light. And on one occasion I had in the Navy, we had to send over the horizon communication between ourselves and Pearl Harbor, and we actually used the 36-inch light and bounced the code off a cloud between ourselves and Pearl Harbor.
Okay, so when you meant over the horizon, usually the lights are ship to ship. One ship is out there and you aim your light
At that,
at the ship, right? And
Yeah.
the ship sees you.
yes,
Okay, over the horizon means you cannot see that
No.
target anymore.
right.
So now you're sending a signal, bouncing it off a cloud.
Yeah, generally go
Okay.
to see the navigator, and he gives you the location from where you are to where your target area is, and then if we can, find a cloud there and bounce it in that direction off that cloud.
Gosh, that's interesting. You could do that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and continue your story. I know that you went on into Japan, but anything before you
No,
got
we
there?
we
Okay.
went from Pearl into the Philippines,
Oh, okay.
and we put into Leyte Bay in the Philippines. It was not long until we were advised that we were being made part of Halsey's Third Fleet, and that we would be leaving Leyte Bay and heading north.
Halsey, now that's a very famous admiral.
Yes,
Did they have a nickname for him or a code name for him?
yeah, they called him Blackjack.
Blackjack. Okay.
Yes, and so it was not long until all of the ships of the Third Fleet assembled there in the Philippines, and we took off and went north. And the speculation was that we were going to join in the attack on Okinawa. But in communications, you get to know where your location is on the map. So it wasn't long until at least the communications people knew that we weren't going to Okinawa. We were going someplace beyond Okinawa.
Okay.
Then the feeling is we're going to go to Japan. We're going to take the war direct to the Japanese in Japan. So that's what we did.
Okay. Now, as you're going in that direction, you're escorting an aircraft carrier, or what are you escorting?
Oh no, we're protecting we're in what's called 38.3, which was a group of the Third Fleet. And we had 3 CVs, which are large aircraft carriers, with us. And we had 2 CVEs that we had to protect.
Did you have a normal position in that task force where you were
Normally,
stationed?
the light cruisers, the Cleveland class, were on the side of the carrier that faced the land. So the probable invasion of enemy aircraft would come from the land going out to the sea, and we were positioned to protect that carrier. So we're kind of running a flank protection for the carrier.
You were the buffer,
Yeah,
and you were going to take the hits first before the
Yes.
aircraft carrier did.
yeah.
So how'd that make you feel?
Well, you didn't think about that.
Yeah, think
you
about
know?
it. That was a job.
That was a job to do, and that you don't put those things in your mind. I
Okay.
never did.
Okay, well, you were really in harm's way because you were the first target they were going to hit before they had to go through you to get to the aircraft carrier.
And that's interesting because you think of all of those things after it's over.
After it's over.
Yeah, you don't think of those things while they're going on.
Okay. All right. Continue with your story. What happened?
So then we took off and we made a whole series of both air and bombardment attacks on Japan. Major targets were Yokosuka Naval Air Base in Japan. We went north to Hokkaido and went on a big bombardment mission one time against Japanese steel factories up north on Hokkaido. And just operated up and down hitting military targets on the east coast of Japan.
Okay. How was the chow on board a light cruiser compared to, say, a little tiny destroyer? Any difference, or you can think of?
Well, I'm told it was. I never hadn't experienced the destroyer that much, but the one thing I always thought was interesting, destroyers could not produce ice cream, and light cruisers on up could produce adequate ice cream, adequate supply.
That was a valuable commodity?
Commodity.
Okay.
And anytime we had an aircraft down in the water, they would send what we called a tin can or a destroyer out to see if we could rescue the pilot. If the destroyer rescued the pilot, they could exchange that pilot for 5 gallons of ice cream. And so we had hospital facilities aboard the light cruiser I was on. So the destroyers would come back from their rescue missions, come alongside, tie up, and we always had to send them the ice cream before they would send us the pilot.
So, hey, the destroyer captain was smart. He held that hostage, that pilot, until he got his ice cream.
That's right.
Okay, that was really important to
That
them.
was important. The other thing is we had a captain that was a graduate of Annapolis. He was a full captain in command. And he was an Annapolis graduate and with a low number. So, he was kind of a senior officer out there. And he was very Navy. And every time these destroyers would come alongside with crew members with cut-off dungarees, the typical... he was highly insulted. He used to talk to me, look at them, look at, that isn't the Navy, we're the Navy.
So you got a chance to talk to your captain.
Oh, yes.
And where was your job position to
we
do
were
that?
on the bridge.
So you're on the bridge with all the high command.
Yes.
And you can overhear the captain or the officer of the day.
And we had microphones mounted on the bulkhead, so we could hear the communications going on from the carriers into the ships, into the airplanes that were making attacks. So we were in the middle of the communication.
Okay, so you were a very knowledgeable guy as to what was happening in the war.
Oh, yes.
Did you have buddies come over and talk to you and say, hey, Joe, what's happening now? Or anything like that? Or how did the information get out?
It was scuttlebutt.
Scuttlebutt.
It was broadcasted there. And it's interesting you talk about the captain because it was a great lesson in my life. He was a man that was in command. He was a naval officer, and he was in command. And he played that role, and he played it well. But interestingly enough, at night, he moved, whenever we were in enemy territory, he would move his quarters and sleep up on the bridge at night. He had a private stateroom on the bridge. If he got up in the middle of the night, which he did very, very often, put on his slippers, put on his bathrobe, if he went forward of the ship on the bridge, he would be in command, according to the Navy. But if he walked back on the bridge to the signalman, he was just another person. We went about our duties, and we got to talk to him like father and son. And he was one of the nicest people that you'd ever want to meet. He wanted to know where we were from and wanted us to join the Navy full time. He was constantly recruiting long-term Navy people, you know.
So there was two faces to your captain. One was the role of a captain in authority and in command.
Yeah.
And when he wasn't the captain, he was a nice guy. Like you said, you could talk a father to son type
Yeah.
of conversation.
Yeah. And he'd say, where are we going? What are we doing? What are we up to? Well, Captain, the general feeling is we're not going to Okinawa. We're going to Japan. Oh, is that so? How'd you arrive at that conclusion? You know? Well, you can tell by the track we're reporting every hour, you know. Our track is we're heading to Japan. That's an interesting thought. And never told us anything, but always, what's the scuttlebutt aboard the
Yeah,
ship?
so he knew where he was going, of
Yeah.
course, but he wanted to know if you guys knew.
Knew where he was going. So that was...
Okay, so then what happened, continuing the story then? You're going toward Japan now, right?
Well, I think let's jump to the last day.
Okay. Now what? The last day. Now this is the climax of the whole story.
Well, it's not the climax of the whole story.
Oh, okay.
It's just part of...
Okay, hang on, folks. There's more to come. Okay, go ahead.
And we get confused because people that lived in the United States, the war was over on the 14th of August. We're on the other side of the date line, so the war was over on the 15th of August. So we get confused with dates.
Okay.
That's the reason.
So for the United States, it was the 14th of August.
And if you were in Japanese water, it was the 15th.
It's the 15th of August. That's interesting. You had two different days for the end of the war.
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
that became confusing to certain people.
So in the history of the United States, is it considered the 14th of August when
Yes,
it occurred?
yes, yes.
Okay.
And if you read the paper, and I brought a copy of the paper along,
Okay.
advertising San Francisco, the paper is dated the 14th.
Okay. So we're
To
going
us, it was the 15th.
We'll show the viewers a paper. Okay.
Right. So then I reported to duty at 0400 hours that morning. Had beautiful day. We're told we were 121 miles from Tokyo. The target of today was going to be Tokyo. We would probably launch 185 airplanes to go to Tokyo that morning. That the aircraft carriers were in position getting ready for flight operations. Still dark, but a moon. Beautiful day in the middle of summer. It was a gorgeous day. And everything was going right according to plan. We launched the aircraft, and it didn't seem like maybe 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. We heard that the flight crews were in contact with the enemy. They were making their strikes, and all of a sudden on the radio came a voice that we had never heard before. And the voice said, "Angels," which meant airplanes, aircraft. "This is Blackjack. You are to cease all offensive action and return to your nest. Do you understand me? Cease all offensive action and return to your nest."
And Blackjack was the
Halsey,
Admiral Halsey.
Admiral
Okay.
Halsey. And
Okay.
he gave these commands personally. And there was a lot of excitement aboard the ships. The horns were going off, the whistles were going off. You could tell that the whole Navy was in euphoria, of thrill, because that only meant one thing. And I think that Halsey allowed us to have that moment of joy. And I would guess maybe 15 minutes later, this very stern voice came. "Jamboree," which meant all ships under my command. "This is Blackjack. We are still in a state of war. You are to be prepared to defend and, well, let me put it this way. You are to assume defensive action if necessary." And that was the signal to go back to work. Okay, the show's over. And I always remember, because then we turned and we went to sea. We left the coast of Japan, and as we were going to sea, the Halsey aboard the Missouri sent up a signal, "Tear Victor George, well done."
And what does that mean? Tear Victor George.
Well done.
Well done. Now,
Well
is that a flag, a signal flag?
Signal flag that you put up on the
Okay.
up on the halyards. Flags. So that was the end of the war for us. Then the story started for me on the 19th. That was the 15th. 4 days later, on the 19th, I reported to work on the bridge at 4 in the morning again, and I was notified the communications commander wants to see you on the bridge. And I went up to the bridge, and Commander Mindy was there, and I addressed him, and he said, "Yes, I was expecting you. The Marine contingent aboard this ship will leave the ship and go on a special mission, and they need communications support. And I talked to your commanders, your superiors, and they recommend that you go with them and supply them with communications capability to keep them in contact with the ships at sea." And he said, "How does that sound?" And I said, "Sounds like something new, and I'll give it my best shot." And he said, "Fine, go below, draw sidearms, get battle gear, and be prepared to leave the ship at 0800. Go back on the fantail." And I went back there at 0800, and the whole Marine contingent that we had aboard the ship were assembled all in battle gear. And at 9:30, nobody was saying, "What is the mission?"
Mhm.
And at 9:30 in the morning, we were put in canvas bags and transferred from the cruiser onto a destroyer, bridging the gap between the two ships. And when they were all transferred over, they took us to an attack transport. They call them AKAs. And we went to the attack transport and transferred to that. And it was at that point that I was taken to a briefing, and the Marine contingent, which amounted to totally about 3,900 Marines aboard the attack transport, will go to Japan and occupy Japan, and we will be the first wave that will go in on this occupation mission.
So you're part of the first wave of the Marines that are going to land.
I was not only part of the first group, I was in the first wave.
The very first wave. Well, lucky you. Okay.
As I say, I drew the short straw.
Okay.
And so it was probably, we made one attempt at going ashore, and it was recalled due to bad weather. So I believe that was on the 28th of August. The weather lasted about 2 days, and then on the 30th, we again assembled. We're loaded in LCVPs, landing craft, personnel, and vehicle. And when the first wave was assembled, we got the signal to execute, and we headed for Japan. And we were told that we were going to occupy a kamikaze airbase that was part of Yokosuka. The airbase name was Opama, and we would land at Opama. The first sight of Japan, I can remember as if it was yesterday, was seeing a beacon light in the distance about 1 o'clock to our location. As we went through the fog, it became very clear that there was a breakwater coming out from the land. The beacon was on the end of the breakwater. We went around the breakwater and made a turn, probably 90 degrees to the right, to starboard. And it was not long before we were abeam of a huge seaplane base, with a tremendous landing ramp area for the seaplanes. And we all went parallel to this thing, and then on what they call Form 18, we all at the same time made a 90-degree turn to the starboard, and now we were all going towards the aircraft ramp. There were 10 LCVPs in the original landing, and we touched that concrete airplane ramp within 5 minutes later, and then we dispersed to secure the base. And once we secured the base, then the top sergeant and the next sergeant in line, in rank then, called to me and said, "Join us." And they took me, and we went to the top of the headquarters of this base, up on the roof. There was 3 floors to this building, and we went up on the roof, and we took the Japanese flag down and put the American flag up in its place. And at the time, we were thinking this was the first American flag that was raised on the island of Japan. I don't want to make that claim today, because when it came down, even in the area that we were in, there was 10,000 Marines landed at various locations that morning. So you can't really say this one was first and that one. But at least for us, we had secured the base, we had achieved our mission, and that was the part of history, I think, that I enjoyed the most. I got to know the 2 sergeants quite well, and said to myself, you had every right and privilege to be here. Both of them were veterans of Guadalcanal. They had been in the Pacific since Guadalcanal, and they were very tough Marines, I can tell you that. They were battle weary, and but they deserved to be here. I hadn't gotten involved in the war directly until May of this year, and now it was August, so my total war experience was in months and not in years. But the interesting part, particularly if you hear things going on in the present conflict that the United States are involved in, and one of the things that impressed me about what we did, and it's always been a source of inspiration to me. Our commanding officer was a Marine by the name of Major Green, and I remember going to a briefing one morning, and he said to us, if you guys have any hostility whatsoever in you against the Japanese people, you better dump it, and you better dump it now before you walk out that door. Because you are going to see a people who have suffered a great deal. You are going to need a people that need help. These people, their women and children have had tremendous suffering. And the day you land is going to be the first day of rebuilding Japan. And that's our purpose of going there, is to rebuild and give these people back their country. And hopefully that we can live in peace with them for a long, long while. And he ended the whole briefing by saying, and if anyone disobeys my order, you're going to report to me. I'll handle the case. And I will treat harshly with anyone that disobeys my orders. So it was kind of a nice feeling.
Sure.
We got there. Probably some of the sights when we walked in The first 2 days were very businesslike. We were meeting with Japanese officers. We were learning about the base, the do's and don'ts of the systems that were on the base. And one of the interesting short stories that I had, short, and as they say, small world, there was a Japanese interpreter, a member of the Japanese Navy, acting as an interpreter between the Japanese officers and the American officers. And he spoke fluent English, and that fascinated me. I mean, he could interpret back and forth rapidly. I went to Japan with Flying Tigers years later in a commercial venture. We hired a director of sales for Japan. That director of sales was named Nick Nishiyama. Nick Nishiyama and I were now kind of a get to know each other dinner one night. And he said, "Is this your first trip to Japan?" And I said, "No, Nick, it is not. I came to Japan many years ago. In fact, it was August 1945. And of course that raised his eyebrows and he said, "Tell me about that." And I told him, and guess what?
Why?
He was the interpreter.
Amazing.
He was the interpreter at that negotiating table the first day we met with those. So we found a great camaraderie with the two
Very
of us.
good. Yeah, a lot in common.
A lot in common.
Very good.
And of course, at that time, we were thoroughly brief. I was in all of that training from the 19th to the 30th. My total Japanese vocabulary was probably 16 to 18 words, Beyond that, we had to depend entirely upon this Japanese interpreter to communicate between the Japanese and the Americans.
Okay.
And then the other story we like to tell is about the third day we were out on a perimeter of the base, and we encountered these young boys looking through the gate. And we were told, don't shake hands with the Japanese. They don't shake hands, they bow. So we went out and we bowed and we said, "Ohayo gozaimasu," which is like good morning. And they smiled and they said, "Ohayo gozaimasu." And we started to talk to them. And to make a long story short, I asked the carriers to send us bats and balls from the carriers. And we developed a communication with them by teaching them to play baseball. So every day we'd have more and more boys coming on the base to learn how to play baseball. And by the time we left there, Japan, we probably had enough boys to start our own little league
Very good.
on the base. It was cute.
Right.
But the interesting part of the story I didn't know until years later, we were always saying to ourselves, where are the parents to these boys? Because we saw no adults. Mm-hmm. And they said, and years later I found out that the probability was very high that these boys were war orphans. Their parents had been killed, and they were banding together for protection and food and whatnot. And so there weren't any parents. But they would invite others in their group to come, you ought to come out to the base, and meet these Americans. So I think that was kind of a good feeling that our first camaraderie was with these young adults. I would say, you can't tell from the size of them and the age of the face, but probably in the age of 10 to 15 years of age.
So you won their hearts over by showing them how to play baseball.
How to play baseball.
And they got the word out. The Americans are nice guys after all.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to thank you for being here and sharing your story. And we'll talk about your other experiences at another interview.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Here's a picture of Joe Healy during World War II as a young sailor.
Okay, be careful. Down a little bit. Okay. And that says, "Old glory flies over the land of the rising sun." And we're going to have Joe Healy read the rest of it.
The French page says, it was 0400 hours on August the 15th. I had reported from my scheduled watch on the signal bridge of the USS Dayton. The watch that we relieved briefed us. We were and made the necessary notations in the ship's log. We were cruising at 10 knots and were 110 nautical miles southeast of Tokyo on a heading of 270 degrees. We are observing radio silence, merry black light with our communications media. The aircraft carriers were preparing for flight operation. The target of the air attack today would be Tokyo. I glanced out over the ocean. I could see the ships of the Task Group 38.3 silhouetted on the morning dawn. It was a relatively warm night. There was a light breeze and a slight rolling sea. A beautiful day was dawning.
This is a map that Joe Healy kept as a souvenir on his invasion day into Japan. So you can see the landing points that the Marines had all over Japan as alternates as well as strike zones. Here is the USS Dayton. This is the ship, the Cleveland class light cruiser that Joe Healy was in. Now this is the crew, or part of the crew of the ship. Guess where Joe Healy is? He's that very young guy, upper left-hand corner. So there he is right there, just in case you wanted to know what he looked like when he was a young man.
Okay, so go back.
The interesting part was the August 14th date.
Okay, so you were in August the 15th when that occurred,
Yes,
but here in the United States,
it was the 14th when the
Yes.
news reached you. So it reached you before.
we're going to get that date right now. Los Angeles Examiner, August 14th, 1945. Okay, go right ahead, Joe.
Yeah, the best we could get this translated was, this was the status of the war from a Japanese standpoint, where their troops were deployed, what activities were going on in the world at the end of 1944, the beginning of 1945.
Okay, so what are we looking at? Is this an American
No,
map?
this is a Japanese map that was located in the headquarters building at Opalma.
Ah,
And I laid claim to it and have kept it all this time. And I had it reviewed by some Japanese men that I had met, and they translated as best they could that they assumed that this was a status of where the Japanese forces were and activities by the end of 1944, the beginning of 1945.
okay, and go ahead and tell your story on that one.
Yes, one of the days we were on patrol in Yokohama, Japan, and I was walking down the main street with my fellow Marines, and we saw this sign on this shop called McKay Radio, and we said, boy, that is the international kind of brother of what we knew in the United States as the Western Union. So I went into this shop, and there was an elderly Japanese man there that spoke very, very little English, and I spoke very, very little Japanese. But somehow the two of us communicated that I wanted to send a telegram to my mother back in the United States. And he pulled out a pad which had a whole bunch of English sayings on it, and I could utilize this to check off what I wanted to say to my mother and to send the telegram off. The way that came out in this thing, it said, "To my mother and father, love to all at home, fondest, loving, darling letters received, many thanks, all my love," and it was unsigned. And within a few days, my mother received a phone call from Navy intelligence in Washington and started to ask her a whole series of questions about her son and where was he and what branch of the service was he in. And when she started to get worried, they told her that they were inquiring about a Mackay radio message that they received from Yokohama, Japan. And to the best of their knowledge, it was the first commercial telegram sent at the end of World War II from Japan. And that they promised her that when they finished with their investigation that they would send her a copy of the telegram, and she received this in October.
Okay, what's that little one, the smaller one there at the very bottom?
Well, this was, it's kind of like a gun permit. When I went down to draw sidearms to go on the occupation mission with the Marines, I was issued a .45 caliber pistol, and that was my receipt for the pistol, and the fact that I also got 3 rounds, clips of ammunition that was given to me along with the pistol.
Dr. Raymond BIEL was a pilot on a B-29 in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Let's listen to what he has to say.
My name is Dr. Raymond BIEL. I'm a retired dentist. I practiced in Bellflower for about 38 years, and when my first wife passed away, I happened to meet a young lady that was a member of Leisure World, and she was a former patient of mine for about 25 years, and we got together and decided that rather than living alone with a dog at home, it would be better for us to get together. So I moved in with her, married her, and moved in with her in Leisure World. That's how I came to be in Leisure World. And we live in right off the golf course, which is very handy for watching people come by, and we enjoy it very much. I want to go back in history. I was a young pilot, just about 22 years old, and we were assigned to a B-29 group in Nebraska, and 15 crews were selected by Colonel Paul Tibbets to form a new group. We called it the 509th Composite Group. It was a unique group in the Air Force. It was consisted of 15 airplanes, and the original plans were half of them to go to Europe to bomb Europe if the atomic bomb was ready, and the other half would bomb Japan. But we were transferred into his group, and he formed the 509th Group, which was a unique group in the Air Force. It was a composite group. It was completely self-controlled. We reported only to General Hap Arnold and President Roosevelt. And it was a top secret organization. We were told not to tell anybody about what we were working on, and we had no idea what we were working on. But we trained in Wendover, Utah for about 12 months, 11 months. We did some overwater navigation out of Cuba. And in June of '45, we were transferred to the Pacific Theater. We had brand new airplanes, specially equipped airplanes, and we were not greeted very well by the crews of the B-29s that were already in Tinian that had many missions, because we were being treated, they felt we were being overly treated by the Air Force. And it was kind of a joke going around that the Air Force, that the B-29s that we had were carrying one bomb and we were going to end the war. We had no conception of what we were working on. Our crew had 5 missions to Japan, bombing 5 different cities with what were called Fat Men. And these were 10,000-pound bombs with high explosives. We had 5 different cities. Our primary targets were an individual aircraft plant or a sulfuric acid plant. It was pinpoint bombing. We hit most of the targets that we had. We missed a couple. But then on August 6, 1945, we were briefed to go to, as a weather ship, one of 7 weather ships assigned to a new mission, to fly to Nagasaki and report the weather. We were briefed. We were carrying no bombs. We were carrying a weather reconnaissance man from the 20th Air Force, and our mission was to report the weather to the Enola Gay, which was flying about an hour behind us. All 3 targets of the weather ships were clear. Nagasaki was clear, Hiroshima was clear, and Kokura was clear. And Nagasaki, Hiroshima being the primary target, that was the one that was dropped on. It was a military target, headquarters for the total defense of Japan as far as the southern islands were concerned, so it was not a civilian target basically, but a lot of civilians were killed because of what the bomb did. It wiped out perhaps 3/4 of the city, and with tremendous fires, and incinerated a lot of people immediately because of the intense heat that an atomic bomb produced. They were literally cremated instantly. When we got back to the base, we had no conception that it was an atomic bomb until we heard what President Truman was announcing over the radio, that a Japanese city had been wiped out and that the threat to the other cities of Japan was imminent if they did not surrender. And as a result, on August 6th, August 9th, another ship was sent with an atomic bomb, and they bombed Nagasaki that morning. They had a problem flying over Nagasaki because of the weather. Their primary target was Kokura, but Kokura was all socked in with weather. And when they arrived at Nagasaki, they dropped the bomb through an opening in the clouds. And unfortunately, they were short of gasoline, that they had to land at Okinawa. And when they landed on the runway at Okinawa, 2 of the engines stopped because of this lack of fuel. That's how close that ship was cut off. Looking back on the results of what happened, we know we ended the war, and we saved several million lives, because at that time, all of the soldiers from Europe were being transferred to the Pacific, and they were staging on Okinawa for an invasion of Japan, which was scheduled for October. And Japan was so heavily fortified, it would have been a bloodbath. Fortunately, the soldiers on Okinawa and Tinian and the other islands, when they heard that the atomic bomb was dropped, they celebrated because they figured they didn't have to go and invade Japan on an individual basis. Looking back on history, we have no regrets of what we did. We felt that we did what we did because we were trained to do that, and that was our job, to end the war, and it eventually did. Nowadays, they've got enough atomic weapons to wipe out the world almost, so to speak. And I hope they never drop another atomic weapon or ever use another atomic weapon. Okay. Since the dropping of the atomic bomb, we've had reunions approximately every 5 years for the 5-year celebration, 10, 15, up until about the 35th year. And then in 1945, at the 50th reunion, we decided that we would meet every year. And as a result, what originally started out with about 700 veterans meeting this year in 2008, there were only 4 that showed up at the reunion. But we hope to continue as we grow older. More and more of us are gone. That's true of veterans of the Second World War. A lot of us die every day. And we hope to continue our reunions. Next year we'll meet in Albuquerque and perhaps take a visit to Trinity site where the first atomic weapon was tested.
The question I was going to ask Dr. BIEL was, where did you get your training, and what were the circumstances that you got a hold of that B-29?
Okay. I graduated from flight school in Stuttgart, Arkansas in twin-engine planes, and then was shipped to Florida to train in B-17s. And we were transferred after B-17 program to Lincoln, Nebraska, and a major came through and said they needed new pilots or new crewmen for a new program that was coming off the line. That was the B-29 program. And these were the biggest and fastest airplanes that the Air Force had at that time. And there were 15 fellows that were selected from the group that we were a part of, and we were transferred into a B-29 program. We got the training in B-29s as co-pilots and crews, and we were all ready to go to Saipan and bomb perhaps Japan. And we were called out by Colonel Tibbetts, selected because we had more time in B-29s than anybody in the Air Force at that time. And he formed a composite group out in Wendover, Utah, a top secret program. And we were assigned to that and got our training, high altitude training, long range navigation training, over water navigation training. And in June of '45, we were sent to the Pacific to prepare to drop the atomic weapons.
How high did those B-29s fly?
B-29 could fly. It was a stripped down airplane. We picked them up at the factory. They had no armament in them and no protection for the crew as far as shots being fired at it. And it was a lightweight airplane. No guns. We just had 2 guns in the tail. And we could fly at 35,000 feet and outrun any of the fighters that were in the Air Force at that time.
Was the cockpit pressurized, or did you?
Yes, they were all pressurized cabins at 8,000 feet. They were all very comfortable to fly. And normally we had, 13-hour flights when we flew up and back to Japan, so the mess officer always provided food for us.
Okay. Were 13 hours, did you have a bathroom aboard the plane? Or?
Yeah, there was what they called a relief can. And the rule on our crew was the first guy to use it had to clean it when we landed. And it usually took care of itself. No problems.
Very good. Okay, Dr. BIEL, can you explain what this picture is that we're looking at?
This is the nose art on our B-29, one of the 15 ships in the 509th Composite Group that was assigned to and trained to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. Each of the ships had their own selection of nose art, and it was selected by the crew members. This was done because we played a lot of poker together, and it was named after a poker hand. Shows the Japanese getting kicked out of an old Iowa outhouse. This is signed by 4 of the crew members that were still alive in about 1995. That's a picture of an airplane backing up. Our airplanes, the B-29s, were specially equipped with reversible propellers, and we could reverse those propellers and back that ship up into a parking area. And this shows that one of the fellows is in a co-pilot area is looking back, trying to guide that ship into its parking spot. This is a picture of the crew that landed after we had come back from the mission that involved the bombing of Hiroshima. On that particular mission, we were a flight weather reconnaissance ship. There were 3 ships that were assigned to 3 different targets. On that particular morning, our ship was over Nagasaki. We reported the weather to the Enola Gay, which was about an hour behind us. And the other 3 ships did the same thing. They recorded the weather over 3 different targets, Kyoto and Hiroshima. All 3 targets were clear, and the primary target was Hiroshima, and that's why they bombed Hiroshima.
Okay, and Dr. BIEL, where are you in this
I
photo?
am standing right by the nose wheel, and there's a sign on the nose wheel, no smoking within 50 feet, and I have a cigarette in my mouth.
Okay, we got you right there smoking. We have the evidence right now.
Okay. That's a picture of the little boy and a picture of the fat man. The little boy was dropped on Hiroshima, contained about 90 pounds of uranium, and actually destroyed about almost the whole city. 80,000 people supposedly had died when that bomb went off. The fat man down below was bombed at Nagasaki on August the 9th. And that was a plutonium bomb. It was a different type of bomb. The little boy had an artillery shell inside that projected one piece of uranium into another piece of uranium that caused the chain reaction to form and to explode. The other bomb was a circular explosive device that imploded a small piece of plutonium from about the size of a grapefruit to the size of a golf ball, and that formed a chain reaction that caused the bomb to explode. Picture of me in a co-pilot seat on our mission that we were on the second bomb mission. We were flying from Tinian to Iwo Jima. We landed at Iwo Jima. Our position there was to be a standby ship for anybody that had to abort one of the 6 ships that were assigned to the mission. We sat on the ground there until about 11 o'clock, waiting for a report that the ship had dropped its bombs, and it dropped 2 hours later than we expected because they ran into severe weather up at over Japan that morning.
Okay, now, who is this again?
That's a picture of me.
That's you.
At the age of 22.
At 22, and I can see a lot of curly hair.
At that time, we did have hair.
Okay, I'm starting to record. Okay, anytime you want.
Okay, this is a model of the Enola Gay. This is similar to the other 15 ships that were in the 509th Composite Group. These are all brand new airplanes that we picked up at the factory up in Omaha, Nebraska. They had special equipment in them for dropping the atomic bomb. They had overpowered engines, reversible propellers, and all stripped of all armor except for the tail guns. And this happens to be a model of the Enola Gay that Colonel Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay, signed at one time. And it's an exact replica of the ships that we flew in Tinian in 1945. Okay.
Ace Warren was on the USS Whitney AR-13 during the Pearl Harbor attack. So he is a Pearl Harbor survivor, and he's going to tell us about his experiences in the U.S. Navy. Is your name, your official name Ace, or how'd you get your name by the name of
Well,
Ace?
my mother and father was playing poker, and I come out. I'm Ace.
That's what it was. Okay, and what's your last name?
Warren, Warren.
Okay, and I take it we're going to talk about the Navy.
Yeah.
Okay, before we do, where were you born? Where are you from? Where'd you get raised?
I was born in Locust Grove, Oklahoma, in 1919, January 13th. My lucky number, 13th.
January 13th. Very
Yeah.
good. And you went to high school there, or?
I went. My mind was. See, that's during the Depression, and I'm trying to make enough money to live on. My father and my mother and my sisters. So I went to CCC camp. You remember those?
Yes, I heard about them.
Yeah, I was in there for 2 years, and the way they did it, the President of the United States, he come up with a deal that you sign up and you can make $30 a month, and you get 5, I get 5, and 25 goes for the family.
Very good.
It brought us out of that impression.
Very good.
And so it's hard to get some meat, you know,
Sure.
at that time. So what I used to set traps. I used to set traps and catch rabbits, and we have rabbit steak. And but we finally got over it, right down to it. We started, and then when I come out of the Navy, CCCs, my mother died, and I was 14 years old, and I'm an orphan now.
So you're 14 years old. You were an orphan, huh?
Yeah. Well, I've been cutting hair for about since I was 15, I think. 15. My father was a barber, so he cut hair in the barber shop, and I'd go down behind a bale of hay and cut hair for free. Not free, I'd get some little money out of it, cut the price down. And so he was our sheriff there. They call him Pigskin Davis, and he carries his pistol on the hip like that, like a wild man, you know. And so he come down by. My father heard some rattling money in my pocket, and he says what to him and said, "Look, said, my son's got money in his pocket. And I don't know where he's getting it from. See if you can check me out." So he went down behind the barn. I had 5 guys back there, and I was cutting their hair. See, I'd cut it for price less. It's charged at the barbershop. So so the pigskin went back to my dad and said, "You don't have to worry about that boy. You just give you some competition." So then my dad started trying to talk to me and took to me. Finally, he got me my apprentice license barber, and I started cutting hair.
Very good. Now, what led you to join the Navy? Tell us about that.
Well, I found out, a guy told me that they give you 3 meals a day and a place to sleep. And I said, "My dang, what I did, I tried it out another way. I had I had a brother-in-law that keeps telling me that Navy be the ideal for me. You could travel with it, see. So I got me a job in town. A guy had a ranch, and I got room and board and $15 a month. So I said, dang! I called my sister and I talked to her on the phone, and I said, and she's in California, and I said, I don't think I can handle this kind of work. I'm up there before daylight and I'm after dark milking cows, fixing this, doing that, and that guy, I learned a lot off of him because he had everything figured out by the minute. He sent me on a job. He knows how long it takes me to do that, see. So I said, man, he's working me. I don't like it. So she says, come on out here and I'll get you in the union. Balboa's Union. And I went out there and I got in the Union, and then I stayed there for a while, and then they was asking for people to come in and join the Navy. So I went up there and joined the Navy. I had to take, when I went in, they took me in for 6 years. And when you stay there 6 years, you only have 14 more to retire. So I stayed in the Navy.
Okay, so what did you get into? What was your
kind of
first
work?
assignment? Yeah.
You could ask me a different question, say what you didn't.
Okay. Well, how'd you start first? What was your first assignment?
My first time was on the deck, working on the deck. And I'll come back looking for my dad, and he was, when I was born, my dad was really old. And when I look back there, and he's working in a house, just house sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him, I said, if I get you, send you some money, would you go up my brother's house in Idaho and live with him? He said, yeah. I said, okay. So I put him for up and above my money income. I got into that. My father, I'm taking care of him, so they give me $40 a month. So I sent that $40 a month up to Idaho. And my dad went up there. I'm a member of the Pearl Harbor Survivor Association.
Okay. And that's a card? Let me get the
it's a
card.
Some
And-
on that side, some on the other side.
Okay, so let me just get a card. And we're going to bring it right here. And it says Life Member. And this is to certify Ace F. Warren. And they got a number 12683L. Is a military survivor of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and Oahu,
Wahoo.
December the
Name
7th,
of it.
1941, and is a life member of PHSA Inc. And it's signed by the National President and the National Treasurer. And on the back, a little more information. To keep alive the memory of our brothers who died in the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941,
Yeah.
and fraternal, patriotic, historical, and educational purposes, to preserve and strengthen comradeship among its members, to perpetuate the memory and history of our dead, to maintain true alliance to the government of the United States of America in fidelity to its Constitution and laws, to foster true patriotism, to maintain and extend the institutions of American freedom, and to preserve and defend the United States from her enemies, whoever they may be. And it's signed Ace Warren.
That's a little good note on it.
That's nice.
But the surprising part of me, our planes didn't come in on Sunday morning and drop those sandbags, but the Japs came in and dropped bombs on and sunk our battleships. And where I was staying in this, I could see this submarine come in, a two-man submarine, and I reported it, and he got over there, he hit the Oklahoma, knocked it clear off, and it went over.
Now, this two-man submarine was a Japanese submarine.
Japanese submarine.
And you saw it coming in.
Yeah, I could see the coming. And going over there, I reported it, and they sunk, I think, 6 battleships. And they think they had us, but they didn't. We beat their butt.
Okay. Ace is going to tell us about some of the days in Pearl Harbor.
When the Japs came in to bomb us.
Okay. Go right ahead.
We, every Sunday morning, our ships, our planes would come in and drops bombs, sandbags. Like yours would be blue, and this would be yellow, and this would be red, and that way they can find who hit what on the Utah, battleship Utah. But this morning, our planes didn't come in, and the guy, the chief honcho in Japan, he had a visit with our president, and but what thrilled me is that the Japanese had their aircraft carrier off our coast, and they was going back and getting bombs and coming back and bombing us again. So I had some metal from the foundry, and the plane coming was about 40 feet from where I was standing on the boat deck on the Whitney. So I'm throwing these metal because if I hit it with a windshield, I can knock them down or hit wiggle it. But
So these planes are coming overhead for their bombing and shooting
Pearl Harbor,
and attack, and you're throwing pieces of metal at them.
yeah, with my
Hopefully
hand.
that you'll hit them in the windshield.
Yeah, I could see the white in their eyes out there.
They were that close.
But the thing is, they were coming so fast out of the bomb. It's about 5 Gs, and I didn't figure that time in. So when I threw one, it looked like it's throwing a curve. But anyway, I took and run out of metal, and I went down and got me a sack of potatoes, and I sold potatoes at the planes. If I hit the windshield, it'd give them get him out of proportion. And I told all the potatoes out of a guy named Dixon was with me on there, and we was throwing potatoes at the Japs planes when they come over right for us. So that's a different.
Very good. So you're one of the few potato throwing sailors. Okay, tell me about your tin can days.
Oh, wow, that. I was talking to a guy the other day here, and I told him that I was on a destroyer, and it was plane guard on aircraft carriers. So when one goes in the water, we got to go pick him up, bring him around, and put him on a David and put him back in it. So
I heard there was a reward every time you were able to pick up a pilot.
you know what the reward was?
Tell me about that.
80 gallons of ice cream.
80 gallons.
Yeah. They bring 80 gallons of ice cream over and trade them for the guy. That's on a carrier. See, they had big ice cream places.
Very good. So tell me, the destroyer you were on, about how many missions or fights was it in? You recall? Did you say?
My destroyer?
Yeah.
Yeah, the destroyer, I got transferred off it to the Whitney, this ship right here. It's a repair ship.
Okay.
I had knowledge in the foundry, and they needed somebody to know how to run a foundry.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over, and they put me right on it. And I had about just a few months, I was a seaman, and now I'm a second-class petty officer. And so when I got my petty officer senior, they sent me to welding school and metallurgy school, and I found out I can learn a lot, and I said I started going on that. And from then on I was on a repair ship. They sent me down to West Indies because we was getting our ships blow big holes in its hip on the side, and so we go in and weld up the hole, and get it good enough to send them back to the Navy Yard in Norfolk.
So you did the temporary repairs so they can get back home to get the permanent repairs?
Yeah.
Okay.
And from then on, they put me on another Amphion. It's another ship, and a repair ship. And they transfer me. They need me over here. They put me to another repair ship, and I go from a repair ship to fixing them up. So I learned a lot on them because you have to put a ship back in place. And so then, about that time, the war was over, and I started cutting hair because I was
But you're still in the Navy, though?
I'm still in the Navy.
Okay.
And so I cut hair for 25 cents a haircut, and I saved that money and sent it back home to my relative, my sisters and them, and went from there to some more repair ships. I went over to when I was on they sent me to a battleship to put in commission, the Indiana battleship. And not few people heard about it because they put them in and the war was over, and then they took them out. Anyway, I was helped put a ship in commission, and when I got that, I said, "Boy, this is right. I don't get seasick on this." And so when
You said you got seasick.
seasick! I laid in my rack for 6 days.
And what kind of ship were you on when you laid on your rack for 6 days?
A destroyer.
The destroyer? So those are...
Top bunk up here, and they kept track of me while I was doing it. I didn't eat for 6 days, and so they got a gurney, and they put me in a gurney and brought me outside, went up to a gun tub, and gave me some fresh air, and so I just like limp all over. My feet and everything is limp because I had no energy, no nothing. And one guy says his foot's moving. See, he said he'll wake up in the wrong place. So then when I took that one, then I started. They said, "Well, you're a good worker." Said, "Well," so I found out that I could go to the Whitney because they need to repair.
So that's how you started your career in the repair business.
Yeah.
You got out of that tin can because of the rough ride and your illness on seasickness.
And we never go to sea only about 2 times a year.
Okay, great.
So that's what I wanted.
So how long were you in the Navy?
20 years.
20 years? And you retired in 1960?
60, yeah.
Okay. How'd you come to live over here in Leisure World?
I found out it's a nice place, security and all. And I've been trying to get in several times, but people talked me out of it. But this time I didn't listen to nobody. I just go in and bought my house, and I've been there. I only been there about 2 or 3 months.
Okay, very good. Glad to have you here.
And I'm always trying. I can't sit still. So when I got that battleship, then they sent me back to after it got it in commission.
Yes.
And they sent me over to the big carrier, aircraft carrier. I just said, what is that? And so when I got on there, they wanted a man over at ComServe Land. ComServe Land is where they put all the sailors in it, and if that shipper needs two repairs, they'd send them over there. See, and I got into that. So when I did, the guy who didn't want it. I said it was in there, and where they were taking and working in a barbershop, And so I worked for an admiral and his staff. I cut their hair. And I was there for about 3 years. And I had 5 different admirals that I cut. I got this, and then, but they would change it, and I wanted to stay, and so I stayed there. So then I got on a Mississippi. It's an old oil burner, coal burner, and when I got on there, and of course I used to sew when I was a kid. My mother made me taught me how to sew on the sewing machine. So I went aboard there, and my dad taught me how to cut hair. So I had 2 good ones, and so I went on this repair ship, and I got in the foundry because I was working at it, and they was happy to get me in there. So
Okay.
I melt down metal and with scope and greg where you with sand, and they pour a hole and you fill it up. Now take it down the machine shop, and then they fix it. They melt it down what you want.
Okay.
And I was on there doing that. So I found out that that's a good place for me because I can go in there and talk to those guys and get a ship that I want. See, so when I went up there and told them that I'd like to have the two-wheeler repair ship, and so he said, "Well, we'll get you." So they signed me up. Said, when you want to go over there? I said, "Let me take 29 days leave, and then I'll go over there." And so I come back, and when all my shipmates have, "You got orders. You're getting out of here." I am, but I knew it. But so I went in, and I sewed clothes there. And the skipper wanted the chief in charge of me. He said, "What you can do and can't do sewing?" I said, "I haven't found it yet." He says, "The skipper wants a tuxedo. You think you can do that?" I said, "Yeah, I can make him a tuxedo." So I went and got into a pattern and all that, and then I fixed him up. And then I used to cut his wife's hair and his 2 kids' hair on the ship, and they come aboard ship. And then I got to sewing them white strips around, take that off. Put them. I got where I could take a uniform like that and work on it and do it in 20 minutes. For some people, it take them 2 or 3 days to get all that picked out. And so I started sewing a lot.
Okay. What was your last job in the Navy before you retired? Remember?
I was in charge of the washing machines, clothes, barbering, tailoring, shoe repair. I can take a 2 shoe and make it look new. But I tell you what, there was a commander. He had a pair of shoes and they was rotting out around the welt. And said, "Can you fix these?" I said, "Yeah, I can put another welt on it." So, and it looked real good. And he took them, and it wasn't too long, and he'd come down and want, "Well, can you fix this here?" I said, "I'll try." So I tried, and it was they were going too rotten. See, so I waited. That commander goes in with the captain and all the commanders for the evening meal, and then talk over the things during the ship. And I told the commander, I said, "I tell you what, I think these shoes here, they're rotten and ran through here." And I said it so loud, all them other commanders heard it. See. And I said, "Do you want to get rid of them?" He said, "Yeah." I walked right over the side of the ship and threw it right over. I just thought I wouldn't have to do it more.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up, so that's a good ending right there.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I was I've been retired 40-some years, 47 years.
Mr. Carmen GRECKO was a member of the United States Army during World War II. He served in Africa and in Italy. In Italy, he was captured by the Germans and served the remainder of the war as a prisoner of war in Germany. So let's listen to his interesting story.
My name is Carmen GRECKO. I'm from Chicago. I was born in July 18, 1915, and went to school, graduated from high school, and I worked for United States Steel in Chicago, and for 4 or 5 years. And then the war started, and my boss told me that I didn't have to go into the Army.
Okay, before we get there, your name is Carmen. Is there a longer name than Carmen, or how did you get the name Carmen? That's an unusual name for a male.
Well, we had 10 kids. I don't know how my mother picked the name. I think she mentioned something, Saint Carmen, but I never heard it.
Okay. All right, we got that straight for the record. Okay, so back to the boss said you didn't have to join the Army.
No, because I could have got a deferment because I was working at all the steel was from the government, making ships and all that. So I went into the service, into the Army, and went from there. I went into the 36th Division in Texas.
Okay, now when did you join the Army? About what year, do you recall?
That was in 1942.
42, so this is after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, right after. I was married in August the 1st of 1941. And 4 months later, the war started, and I had to go back into the service. And
So where'd you get your training in the Army? What boot camp? Where did you go train in the Army?
when did I go into the Army?
Where was the training boot camp?
Oh, boot camp. I was in all over in Texas, Bowie, Texas, and then we had maneuvers in Louisiana, New Orleans, and all around, and Carolinas, and all through there. We basic training was 7 weeks. At that time, it was supposed to have been 13 weeks, and the war was progressing more and more. So we had to go back to Texas, get ready. We went overseas.
Okay, what was your first assignment overseas? Where did you land?
We landed in Casablanca, in North Africa, and then from there we maneuvered around North Africa, training there, night courses and all kinds of things. And then we got on the ship and made the invasion of Salerno.
Now, by any chance, did you speak Italian, landing in Italy?
No, I didn't speak very good Italian.
Okay.
It would have helped a lot if I did, you know.
What were your duties in the Army at that time, in your squad? What was your duty in the squad?
Well, I was a squad leader of 5 men, combat. We went right into combat. We took over a little town after Salerno. But when we landed on the beach of Salerno, it was completely surrounded. All the whole beach was all full of soldiers, dead soldiers. And when we got off, I fell down because I couldn't maneuver around. And then I lay there for about an hour or so, and I went to get up, and the guy next to it, he said, "Don't get up, because the ships were firing into the hills where the Germans were surrounded up there, you know, shooting down all the.
So you didn't want to get hit by the friendly fire of the ships.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I was in the third wave that came in from the ships into PT boats. We landed on the shore.
Okay. Then what happened after Salerno? How
After
did your-
Salerno, well, it was we took over a couple of towns. It killed a lot of people. You know, we had hand grenades. I had a machine gun. We had a bazooka and a flamethrower, and all that. We just wiped out a little town. That's all. We had to because the troops were coming in, and then after we finished that town, we started going further in, and then the German tanks got us hit.
So how'd you deal with the German tanks? What happened?
They shot at us and knocked us all out and killed 2 of my men, and I got hit with shrapnel from one of the bombs, and it was captured. Then the Germans, after a couple of hours, the Germans came and took us away.
Okay, so you were wounded and then captured by the Germans.
Yeah.
So tell us about your experience in the being captured. Did you go to a prisoner of war camp?
No, well, a lot of it I didn't remember because I didn't know what was going on, you know. And then finally, when I did come to, I was on it was like a truck with just a flat bed and all men on it, you know. And they put me on that, and we went straight up Italy into in an ambulance. You know, regular Red Crosses, you know, have you seen an ambulance, an army ambulance? And it was 3 or 4 days. We went straight up Italy, and we stopped off at different places, and
Now, the ambulance you are in, is this a German ambulance or no?
yeah, it was a Red Cross ambulance.
Okay.
Red Cross.
They had a Red Cross
Oh yes,
but
it
it's an
had a Red
ambulance
Cross. Regular,
by the Germans.
Regular. There were 3 of us, 3
Okay.
Americans in it,
Okay.
and they were taking us to Rome. That was quite a way. That must have been 300 or 400 miles south of Rome, and it took us more than a week, week and a half, 2 weeks. We stopped off at different places, and in one place we were in a big building, and it looked like an old school building in Italy, some part of Italy south of Rome. And I went in there, and the man probed. It was a German doctor. He probed into my arm where I had been hit in the left arm, and an aneurysm. And I heard him say to another one, "Kaput." Wow.
And that means no good, right?
That means no good. They were going to cut. So then after that, the man took me down a long hall, and he opened the door and put me in there. And it was so dark, I didn't know. I was just feeling around. I felt on the floor there was a mattress, and I lay down on the floor. And it was a long, narrow building up on the hill. It was a schoolhouse, is what it was. And that night, they had given me a shot. And that night, American the bombers came over, and they hit the opposite end of that building. It was lucky that I had been gone down into that other. And then we woke that next morning. We got up out of there, and we kept going up. And we finally reached in Rome, in the ambulance with they were old German army personnel, you know, and they got lost in Rome. They didn't know where to go. We were riding around here and there, and finally they put us up in an apartment house somewhere. Yeah, can't remember really. And then after a day or two, we got on. They took us to the train, to the depot, and put us on a train. we were going to Germany from Rome, and the car that I was in had three bunks, one up top, and I was on the top one, where I could see out the glass, the window, just and the train had started taking off, and then when the train went by, there were a lot of people on the depot, and there was Hitler and Mussolini.
You saw Hitler and
Yeah,
Mussolini in person.
They were at the train when the train pulled out. You know, it went real slow. And then after that, after Rome, we went through the Brenner Pass and went into Austria. And on the train, there was a doctor. He was an English doctor that had been captured, and he had the privilege of taking care of, you know, all wounded and this and that. And he told me that he was going to get me to a doctor in Austria, in a hospital there. So after we got there, he took me to the hospital, and the doctor examined me, and the aneurysm was, I got hit from the backside, and it went between your artery and the blood, the artery and the bone, and it nicked it. It nicked the artery just like a bubble in the inner tube, you know. And he said that was very dangerous, and if it hadn't been taken care of, it would burst, you know. And so he made me a sling. It was about the size of a garden hose, but made out of material. And he wrapped it around my shoulder and put a sponge underneath me. And he told me to exercise it, and then I exercised with my hand. And after 6 or 7 months, it went away. It went down anyway. My arm was all black from hemorrhaging, you know. And then I was shipped to Stalag 2B, right there. It's in it's East Berlin. East Berlin is what it was. And the English doctor told me that he put my name in for repatriation. And this was in Stalag 2B. And it took I think 3, 4, 5 months before they got, and then he finally came, and he took me to Berlin in 1943. I was to be examined by American doctors, English doctors, not American. I don't know if they're American. I guess they were a doctor, and Swiss, and the Germans. And they looked over the records and all kinds of things, and they said that I could not be exchanged prisoners because I could be operated on and come back again, you know. So I went back to camp, and then after that camp there, the Americans had bombed this camp where I was in 2B. They had bombed. Hitler was around there somewhere, and a couple of bombs hit the camp, and we moved out. Then he moved us up to 7A, Stalag 7A, and then 6 months later, this doctor came back and told me that he put my name in again for repatriation. That was in 1944. Ich bin a Berliner, 1943 and 44. And the second time, we got onto a train, a suburb train, and it ran around Berlin. And the sirens were blowing all over Berlin. And so we stopped. The train stopped. We got up. We went into a shelter, air raid shelter, in East Berlin. Oh boy, and they were dropping the bombs in Berlin at that time. Wow, it was scary. People screaming, kids and wives and old men, all kinds of terrible. So finally, the siren stopped. We got up, we got back onto the train again and went into Berlin. And this same German doctor says to me, he says, "You have been here before." And he says, "You cannot go back home." That's what that. One of the fellows that was with me, he had lost a leg, and he had gone back. They exchanged him. So then I went back to the camp again, and with all kinds of things that went on during that year, 1944. And then one night the Germans came and they moved all of us out of this camp. We were about 2,000 or 3,000 GIs, and they put us on a train with a train that carried animals, and the slats were open between, and we were on that train for 2 days. 2 days and 1 night, and it was cold. It was cold at night. And we went to Poland, and that's when Hitler came out and said that he was going to kill all prisoners of war, and that was Auschwitz in Poland. And from then on, I can't remember. We went to the hospital. We went to a hospital because I had frozen. My feet were frozen. The lower part of my body was frozen. A couple of fellas had cast on their feet, on their legs, and they lost their legs. Gangrene set in. That's about as much as I can remember at that time.
Okay. Go ahead and, how did you finally get released, or what happened?
This time we were in West Berlin. I had been in 3 or 4 stalags. They kept moving me around all the time. Every time I was to go to Berlin to be repatriated, the camp that I was at, they changed me to a different stalag, and this was in West Berlin. That's where the Russians made a big push, and that was toward the end of the war. The Russians came in and with our tanks knocked down all the barbed wire in this camp, and they set all 4 corners. They had guards, towers, where the guards were guarded. They set them on fire, and the Russians never gave us nothing to eat. We were there almost a week and a half, and at that time the war had been over. So after a couple of weeks, 3 of us got together, and we were going to go to the borderline where the Russians and the Americans entered at the Elbe River. At the Elbe River, and that was where we went across the river into the American side. Then from then on, we went to France, and from France we got on the ship and came back home.
Very good. Excellent story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
The one I'm looking at right now. What's this picture about, Carmen?
Oh, this is when we were released. When we came back after the war in New York, we were in a room there, and we were told what we should do, and all these different from doctors. And
Okay, now where are you in that picture?
you see the lines going right up.
Okay, let me go to the line. Okay, I see 2 lines.
Yeah, well, they both go to the same, huh?
Well, there's 2 guys there, and,
Yeah.
and a gal in the middle, right?
Uh-huh.
And are you the one to the right or to the left of that lady?
I'm to the right.
To the right? Would that be you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see you right there.
See, do I look the same?
Nothing's
not
changed. We're going to find out. The audience is going to find out in just a minute.
Really. Oh,
Okay, and then you had another one, did you say? Another picture?
yeah, that's when I am there. You can tell that, can't you?
No. Okay, Carmen, tell me what we're looking at right now.
That's when I first went in, 2 months after. That was in February of 1942. And
Okay.
we got all our equipment and that. And
Okay, which one are you? The one on the right or
On
the
the
one?
right.
The one on the right.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
On that side.
Okay, you're wearing a
I'm the
tie.
shortest one.
You're the shortest one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me get it. This is one of Carmen when he played baseball
Long Beach.
in Long Beach, and you're the one with the red striped pants.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see him right there.
Right there.
Okay.
I was 80 some years old.
Okay, this is Seal Beach team,
Seal Beach team.
and where are you on this photograph?
God, I can't even see. I'm on the end there, standing up on the end, on the left end.
Left end with the yellow stripes.
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
Mr. Alex Britt joined the Army Air Corps in 1942, but ended up serving aboard a secret ship. Let's find out about that interesting story.
I'm Alex Britt, and I live in Leisure World here. In 1942, I had graduated school in 1941. In 1942, I joined the Army Air Corps. I thought I was joining the Air Force, but turned out the Army Air Corps. And my experience in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, I actually joined in Pennsylvania and then was sent back to Fort Dix in New Jersey. I was with a group of entertainers. George Shearing, who was a blind pianist. I played the drums at the time. And I thought, gee, this is a cushy job in the service. I loved it. And a month later, I was transferred on a train to Texas. And I stayed in Texas for a good year and a half. They sent me to a school in Brookings, South Dakota, Brookings A&M, 4-month course. The Army called it an ASAP course, fast course, 16-month course in 4 months. And I learned to be an administrator. Now, when I first came in, I had been working in sheet metal. Well, they soon found out that I wasn't really a real sheet metal worker. I was more in the administrative area, but they made me a technical sergeant right away. I never took basic training. After I came back from Brookings, I recruited for the Army Air Corps 500 technicians who knew how to repair things. And in 1943, in October, 500 technicians, a crew, was put aboard a Liberty ship at that time called the General Thomas LaValle. Well, we sailed to Guantanamo, Cuba. We didn't know where we were going or what the purpose of the ship was. And as a matter of fact, I had to sleep outside on the deck at first because the ship was rolling quite a bit. But I learned to get over that. Well, in Guantanamo, they actually painted out the name General Thomas LaValle, never to be heard again. Ship became the 3rd aircraft repair ship floating. And we sailed off to Australia, to Brisbane. We crossed the equator, I became a polywog, and we had a little ceremony going across the pool where I was neatly dumped into the pool. Got to Brisbane, and Brisbane was rather a small little town at that time, and we were welcomed very broadly. Hi, Yank, hi. Would you like to have a meal with me, Yank? So we did. We had a great time for 2 or 3 days, and then we went on our mission. We found out that we were to repair aircraft all the way along New Guinea, through the islands and the Philippines. And so we started out, we went to Darwin. If I might digress for a moment, I was in Australia 2 years ago, and I have a big plaque showing the Americans going from Brisbane to Darwin and all through the Philippines. And they appreciated what the Americans did at that time. Actually, we drove the Army, primarily drove the Japanese back towards the Philippines instead of invading Australia. When we got to Halmahera, we took on supplies. We had been we had been repairing aircraft all along the way. I happened to be in administration. I would take a helicopter. Now, the helicopters are not like today. A big bubble in front, the pilot and I, and he would go up to the mountains, up, over, and down. He knew that my stomach would be left up there. Every day we did that and picked up the mail, picked up parts, brought them back to be repaired. And then we'd fly them back and on the aircraft. And many times the aircraft were going on a raid in various parts of the Philippines. And we would bring the part back. The last few planes would then take off with those planes. And so it was a great service. Then we went to Leyte in the Philippines. Well, between Yap and Truck, the Japanese had planes flying overhead constantly. And we had a chaplain aboard who used to make a running account of what was happening, because we'd always be woken up in the middle of the night or 3 o'clock in the morning by the planes passing over. Well, one early morning, the chaplain said, everybody out, everybody out. We ran to the stations that we had, and it turned out that one of the planes had dropped a torpedo, which was coming towards the ship. And it looked like the ship was going to be torpedoed. Well, about 20 yards from the ship, the torpedo sank, never to be heard from again, fortunately for us. And we arrived at Leyte, and we spent about a month in Leyte, redoing the ship and getting our supplies again from various. At that time, the Japanese were being forced back in the Philippines, and that's the time when General MacArthur waded ashore. And I happened to be there, and I watched General MacArthur wade ashore 3 times for the cameras. And certainly we were all pepped up for that event. And after Leyte, where we were fully supplied again, we started off with a whole fleet. And we were just part of this fleet that became the invasion of Lingayen Gulf in 1944. After the invasion, successful, I never heard so many guns in my life from all of the battleships that were there and the cruisers that were firing at the Lingayen Gulf and into the towns over there, which were now empty of the Filipinos and certainly had driven the Japanese away. The ship then was going to Subic Bay, but a contingent, including myself, of about 60 of us took jeeps from which had been unloaded from one of the cruisers, and we went from Lingayen Gulf through Dagupan, through all small towns in the Philippines to Manila. And then from Manila, we stayed in Manila for about 3 or 4 days. There were some bombing attempts at Manila, but everybody agreed that Manila was going to be an open city. And so they didn't destroy the city of Manila. MacArthur set up his headquarters there, and we then, our ship being repaired from Subic Bay, all of my comrades and I went to Clark Field. I was in, and it just so happened that that was in January of 1946. Lost a year there, Joe.
Okay. And Clark Field was in the Philippines?
Yes, Clark Field's in the Philippines. And we were anxiously waiting to go home. Well, a lot of the people, a lot of my, not our ship, but a lot of the American soldiers at Clark Field were being flown back by plane. For some unknown reason to me, we were sent back to Manila, back to Subic Bay, and put aboard our own ship. And we sailed from January, 10 of the most stormy days from Manila back to, we were going to New Orleans. And again, we got to New Orleans and it was foggy. And incidentally, this time we stopped at Panama City and Cristobal in Panama. And the captain kept saying, "You will not leave the ship. You will stay aboard." But we all climbed over, and we had a great time for 2 days in Panama City and a day in Cristobal, Colon. And then we hit storms again going across. We got to New Orleans, it was foggy. All we heard was foghorns, and we couldn't land at New Orleans. I had been looking forward to seeing New Orleans, taking a train back to Pennsylvania, to Bristol, which was my home at that time, and New Jersey, which I'm originally from. And we had to turn around, and the ship went to Galveston. And so finally we got off at Galveston, and we GIs took the train. And I must say that everybody aboard the train, unlike, I suppose, the recent Vietnam and other wars that we've had, they were wonderful to us on the train going from Galveston to Pennsylvania Station in New York. And then from New York, we took a train. I got discharged at Fort Dix, honorably, I might add, on the 14th of February, 1946. That was my experience in the Pacific. Aboard the ship, of course, I had many companions who were in New Guinea, in the Army. And they came aboard the ship on a 3-day pass. That's how great the ship. We had ice cream aboard our ship. Made our own ice cream. When I got back, 1946, everybody was welcoming the GIs back. And it certainly was an experience which I didn't intend to spend 4 years with, but I was happy to get out of the service, and I'm here in Leisure World. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Maine DeWitt joined the U.S. Navy and became a master hard hat diver, and then used his skills in procurement of rubber products for the highly classified Silent Service. Let's hear his interesting story.
My name is DeWitt Clinton, Maine. I was raised in Hillsdale County, Michigan. It's close to the Indiana border, on a farm. About nearest town was about 7 miles. So it came time to go to high school. I got in one semester, then winter started. Snow was deep, and I couldn't make my way to school with doing the chores. So I didn't get a high school education, and I quit and took over the farm to help my dad keep from losing it. And a few years later, I decided I need an education, so I joined the Navy.
About what year was that?
1938.
Okay, before the war started.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I was on the cruiser Phoenix in commission, and the Phoenix made it through the war and was sold to the Argentine Navy, and it was a ship that was sunk by the British in the Falkland War. But going back a bit, I left while I was on the Phoenix, I always wanted to be a hard hat diver, so I got second-class diving.
Well, where did you have to go to school to learn to be a diver?
Oh, yes.
And where was that
Very
school?
complicated. Well, the first was off the Widgeon. It was a salvage ship in Honolulu. I spent 4 weeks on that. And then later I put in for the deep sea diving school in Washington, D.C., which is 6 months of school. I got that in 41.
Okay, now what does deep sea diving entail? How deep do you go in that time?
In that time, we could go 300-foot bottom on air. And you get oxygen poisoning if you go deeper. So we had to dilute the oxygen, and the only way to do it was with helium. So as you go down, they go from different banks of gas, pre-mixed gas, and you go down to, I dove on 4% oxygen. And the only thing wrong with it, you don't get drunk like you do on nitrogen, but it knocks your voice cords out. You sound like Donald Duck. So anyway, between diving, I was doing procurement. There was always something that we needed for the submarines, and I was going through the countryside, the civilians, just finding anything I could that would substitute for what we needed. And I was called in and asked if there was any place I could get rubber gaskets. I said, there's no place out here in Australia that I know of. There's the rubber shop out here. And they had trouble getting it out of the States. And another thing too, there's a new synthetic and it was subject to cold flow. Now cold flow is where the hatch comes down and the rubber squeezes out around it, and pretty soon you can't get a seal. So we had a bunch of submarines tied up and couldn't put to sea because of the gasket problem. They couldn't dive deep enough to get below the thermal layer, and so they were subject to the Japanese attack through their sonar. They couldn't hide. So they had me go in front of the admiral and his staff, and there's a lot of people there naturally that was against me even thinking about doing anything, because I told them I thought we could make the rubber here. Anyway, after discussing it a bit, the admiral asked me what I needed, and I told him an admiral's authority, and he said, come in the office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I went in, picked up my orders, and I was to proceed, carry out duties as verbally discussed with the admiral, AAA priority. So I got a couple guys that I knew to help me, and we started searching the libraries for information, because I'd never seen a rubber shop, or nobody else did. And I knew where there were some floaters, that's bales of smoked sheets of rubber that had floated in on Scavenger Beach north of Perth, Australia. So we got some of that, and for a mill, I used a metal bending roll for bending heavy plates to fit the hull. Well, we never used them because with a submarine, you can't. We tied them along the ship to repair them. Well, you had to have them in dry dock to replace the hull plates. So that wasn't doing any good. So I used that to mill the rubber, and I couldn't cool it, so we'd have to mill the rubber twice a day and let it cool. Meanwhile, when it got too hot, we'd have to stop and cool it. Built the press, fabricated the platens, designed the dies and had them machined out. And within a month, we started putting up the smaller parts. I couldn't make the gaskets large enough in diameter to fit the hatch gaskets and the cases. So we made them in smaller rings and vulcanized them to the right pitch circle. And
Now, what does vulcanizing mean? If it was
that
a small,
means curing the rubber. If you remember in the old days, you have tubes in your car and your tires in your car, and they had a hot patch. It was you clamped it to the tube and you lit a fire to it. Well, we couldn't light a fire, so we used steam for the vulcanization, cut the rubber 2 pieces on a 45, grind them till they match, make rubber solvent out of the raw rubber before it was cured, break it down with solvent, put the rubber cement on the gasket, put it in a shape die and pressure and cure it. And it was just as good as new. Anyway,
You were talking about you were then vulcanizing it to make it fit the hatches.
yes, I couldn't get the right chemicals for making the rubber. I had to use the old Goodyear cure, which was a long time. Well, we didn't have time to spend, so I would pre-cure the gaskets, and I made a autoclave out of pipe, and so it takes steam pressure. And then we'd make a bunch of rings and put them in and soak them with heat overnight to finish cure them, make them resilient and tough. Anyway, that's about it. Then when I got out, I started a rubber business.
Okay, but before we get into the rubber business part, that led to a commendation from the Navy. You got a commendation from the Navy for your work.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to read this commendation right now to the public. I just have finished. And at that time you mentioned it was a top secret project, so the commendation could not mention that you worked on a submarine. Is that about it?
Well, the whole thing was the submarines themselves was a secret. Nobody ever talked about submarines. It was all volunteer and only 2% of Navy personnel. So you just didn't talk about submarines. There was no pictures, no identification. Even your mail was which was email in those days, and it was classified so you didn't know the names of the subs that if you was attached to one.
Okay. All right, then we continue with you left the Navy and you started your rubber business.
I started a rubber business in 12th and Central, Los Angeles, and worked day and night, bought a machine, and had that, build another machine, and I kept on and build it up. I was in the sheet business, a plastic sheet business. Well, no, I'm ahead of myself. I started in the rubber business, but there's a lot of competition. There wasn't, and a man came to me with a 45 record, and that was made of shellac and breakable and scratchy. And he said, if you could make a material that we could run on our existing equipment, I'll make us both millionaires. Well, I made it and built the machinery to manufacture it in biscuits, and I started supplying it. And the biggest customer at the time was the Mormon Church. They wanted better record for their tabernacles. And I was quite proud of that because I figured I was doing them super good. And I went from there. One of the things that I really wanted to do is to make the blood bank for handling blood. I was in places on the beaches where when we was making landing out there with medical supplies, and the glass bottles, every once in a while it'd get breakage and break them all over and be blood glass and so on. So I wanted something that was unbreakable that they could handle out there. So I worked on that, and finally I got it approved, and made the material for 16 years and through the Korean War, which was quite handy because they couldn't use the glass at the Chungking Reservoir because of the freeze. So they took the plastic bags, put the anticoagulant in it, then they'd draw the blood and tag the bag. And the corpsman would have a vest, and they'd put 4 packs of blood next to their body. Then they could go alongside a prone body and give them the blood and insert the needle and squeeze the bag or put it under their shoulder to let it down. And then from there I built.
So that bag was your material?
Yes.
They made the material?
All we made was a material. The blood bag was fabricated and sent out from a place called Fenwall at Framingham, Mass., which was owned by Professor Carl Walters and Fenwall. He was the president of Fenwall. He was the owner of Fenwall Instruments before he started with the blood bag. And then later it was sold to Baxter Lab, but it still holds the Fenwall name in the hospitals. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read this right now. Okay, this is a letter from the University of California, San Francisco, and it's signed by a medical doctor Benson Rowe, professor and chief emeritus cardiothoracic surgery. And it says, to whom it may concern. And I'm going to read the letter. It has come to my attention the important historical facts concerning Mr. Maine are in danger of being lost without appropriate documentation, which I hope this letter will provide. My introduction to Buster took place in San Francisco one afternoon in 1956 when he appeared in my office without an appointment, demanding to see me immediately. After reading a newspaper article about my project to construct a flexible leaflet artificial heart valve, he promptly flew his own plane up from Los Angeles just to inform me I was using the wrong material and arranged to provide me with a new polyvinyl plastic he had been working on. The episode led to a friendship and collaboration on multiple projects spreading over 4 decades, during which I developed a great respect for Buster's mechanical skills and knowledge of materials. In my 50-plus years of academic and scientific experience, 175 publications, I have seldom encountered an individual with as much ingenuity as Mr. Maine, whose formal education was minimal, but whose career in the U.S. Navy was legendary and whose subsequent accomplishments have been extraordinary. He began just after World War II by recognizing the detriment of storing and delivering blood transfusions in glass bottles and set out to develop the plastic bags that have been in universal use ever since. He collaborated with Dr. Carl Walter of the Harvard Medical School in that project and was responsible for developing the vinyl formulation that was completely safe for blood storage, and then built a factory in Los Angeles to produce the material. The late Dr. Walter was world-renowned for his development of equipment and apparatus for blood and fluid infusion. He was also a personal friend of mine, and we frequently talked admiringly of Buster Maine's ingenuity and innovations. In my hope that this information will find its way into the right vehicle for recognizing Buster Maine as an important contributor to safety and health through the medium of his expertise in plastics, respectfully submitted, Benson B. Rowe, M.D., Professor and Chief Emeritus, Cardiothoracic Surgery. So those bags that we see in all these movies and pictures, that was your material.
My bag is the grandfather of it. I have one. I should have brought it, but I didn't.
Okay.
It's a grandfather. I made the material for 16 years. And then from there, I just kept going until the last factory I built was, and built it in the early 80s in Urrington, Nevada, a big rolling mills. And that's the history of my life.
Photo is showing what?
Rubber mill converted to plastic.
It takes the plastic as a powder and solidifies it. This is where it is ground, goes into a container, and is shipped to the customer. What we're looking at is the manufacturing shop that was built in the 1980s by Mr. DeWitt, Maine. And that's the open house. Okay, there's somebody in the middle cutting the ribbon. That's you then.
That's me.
Okay, that's Mr. Maine in the middle cutting the ribbon. Okay, but you mentioned you just recently moved to Leisure World. How long have you been here? About 3 months?
About 3-4 months.
And that you just finally stopped working?
Yes, and my daughter wanted to be closer to her. She didn't like chasing around the country.
So what were you doing working to this age?
I was consulting and building machinery for cloning upholstery for antique cars, so they looked like they came off the showroom.
Very good. That's very unusual. Well, thank you very much for being with us and sharing your experiences.
And thank you.
Yeah, don't you know I'm just talking about my girl. So back from the 60s. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now I'll give the microphone back to our wonderful hostess. There she is, Michelle. And she is about to sing My Guy. And your backups, Audrey, Shirley, Jerry, and Grace.
Thank you very much, Herb. Okay, you did a wonderful job, as usual. Herb is going to be getting a recording contract. All right. Straight from Leisure World. Hi, gals, you ready? All right. Is my skirt on? Nothing you can say can tear me away from my God. My God. Nothing you can do can make me untrue to my God. My God. I'm sticking to my God like I stick to a letter, like birds of a feather. We stick together. I'm telling you from the start, I can't be torn apart from my guy. Nothing you can do.
After they get done, I gotta pull his strobe light out in the middle.
My guy. My guy. Nothing you can buy could make me tell a lie to my guy. I'll leave my guy my word of honor to be faithful, and I'm gonna just be believing. I won't be deceiving my guy. My guy. muscle-bound man can take my hand from my God. My God. No handsome face can ever take the face of my God. He may not be a movie star, but when it comes to being happy, we are. There's not a man today who could take me away from my God. No muscle-bound man can take my hand from my God. No handsome face can ever take the place of my God. He may not be a movie star, but when it comes to being happy, we are. There's not a man today who can take me away from my God. There's not a man today who could take me away from my God. There's not a man today who could take me away from my God. There's not a man today who could take me away from my God.